from the Gospel of Matthew in the 25th chapter. We're continuing with the parables that Jesus has been sharing on the kingdom of heaven. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one who had 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you did not scatter the seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reaped where I did not sow, and I gathered where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with a banker, and my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for the worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be the weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the gospel of the Lord. It's always interesting on these parables, the ending. You know, someone's getting thrown out, and the gnashing of the teeth begin. And then I say, this is the good news. Just doesn't make sense. But there's something in there, I think, that we can focus on. My aunt, who had lived to her 90s, was never married, lived in the Depression time. And when she and Dad would get together, one time she said to Dad, you know, when I die, you need to be careful when you go through my apartment. I'm hearing a hum. You need to be careful when going through my apartment. When she died, we discovered why we had to be careful. She was one of those people who had gone through the Depression and didn't trust the banks. And she had hidden money, hidden in places that I wouldn't have expected to find. And we had to be very careful because when we discovered some, we knew there must have been more. And so every book she had, we had to go through, and everything. That's not unusual, I don't think, for people who had gone through the Depression time. You know, those people who had money in a safe bank, at least they thought so, and then it all crashed, you know. And I always wondered, you know, how could they be like that? You know, bury their money in maybe not the ground, but in places. But, you know what? The apple doesn't fall far from the trees. And I will not divulge the places where my money is, but I too have got that characteristic. You know, it's interesting. When I, a couple years ago, had a financial consultant come and, you know, thinking about retirement, and he asked, well, what's your risk comfort? And I kind of looked at him, and he says, well, is it conservative, moderate, aggressive? And so he was trying to explain, well, how do we want to invest this money that you want to invest, and what do you want to happen? And so I answered a few questions, and he said, well, it looks like you're conservative. Now, you know, maybe that I am a little bit conservative that way, but I sure would like a higher interest on my returns, you know, and I have some CDs, and, you know, it's almost painful to see that you get like 1%, you know, when you used to get 4%, or in your savings account, you know, 0.5%. You know, that's a little too conservative for me. I would like to have more. Well, what does this all have to do with this story? You know, what is your risk comfort? In the story, we see two of these slaves, or we could say stewards, of the master's property were kind of aggressive in their risk. I mean, after all, they returned 100%. I'd like to know where you get that. But, you know, they were risking. They were given this money. They were given the property, and they knew their master. They knew the master who would expect a return on what he had given to them to manage. But there was the other one, the one who only had 1 talent. And maybe that's why he only got 1, because it said they were given according to ability. Maybe it was given according to their comfort of risk. Well, that one didn't have much of a risk comfort. In fact, he went and buried it in the ground. He wasn't willing to step out and to try to improve what the master, you know, property was. He wasn't willing to risk. And I have to wonder, are you willing to risk? Are you willing to risk with what God has given to you, entrusted to you? Are you willing to risk in the talents, which also is money in this story, but the talents of your abilities? You know, I think about that, and it's interesting at this time, this always comes up right in the fall, and we're talking probably bringing in your stewardship stuff next week. Are you willing to risk? Because lots of times in lots of churches, the challenge is, would you give a tithe? 10% of what you have been entrusted with? Are you willing to give 10% to support the ministries, not of this church, but of the ELCA? Are you willing to risk? Many of you would say, no way. No way, because how am I going to live? How am I going to make it? How will I, exist on 90% of what God has entrusted to you? So we can look at that in that area as you think about how are you going to support the ministry? How are you going to support God's work being done here in this community? Are you willing to step forward? Are you willing to go maybe to the moderate instead of the conservative? Or are you going to bury your money into all the good things you want? We got a chorus. But let's get off the money, because that's pretty nerving for you. How about, are you going to risk? Are you going to risk doing a little bit more in supporting your church by a giving of your time, using your talents? Or are you going to stay in that comfort zone and sit back? I could never do that. I mean, how many of you would love to read the lessons like Eunice did today? No risk takers? Or better yet, it would be nice if we could have a couple more assisting ministers, as Chrissy is, and others here. How many would be willing to step out of their comfort zone and risk? How many of you would be willing to just come to church? Count on me, I'm there. Well, you are here, right? It's not a big risk to come to church, but if you think about it, in the time of the Pharisees and the scribes that Jesus is talking to, they were fighting the Roman government, the Jewish people, the Christians who were following Jesus. That was a risk. In other countries, it would be a risk for you to do that. And so consider yourself having taken the risk. In here in town, it's not a big risk, but it's something different. What would you do on this? Would you take the risk and say to the organizer of an athletic, like soccer or baseball or whatever organization? And I didn't pick on you, Gary. Would you be willing to risk to say, I'm not going to have my child be there? If you want, start it after noon. Then my child can be there. Because that's a risk. That's a risk. Speaking up. Speaking up against that which maybe will prevent people from gathering in worship. Here's a risk. Are you ready to take the risk that all people are welcome in this church? Would you say that's true? Yes or no? Yeah. I think that's what we do say. See, the church takes a risk in the community too. A church takes a risk. That's us, take a risk in a community. And stepping out and being advocates against, prejudice. Stepping out of our comfort zones and seeking to give and to help people who are in need. And I think what Jesus is really saying to us in this parable is this. It's simple. Let's take an inventory. What is your risk comfort? Where is your risk? Are you willing to step out and to be advocates for those who have no voice? Are you willing to be a church that truly shows what the kingdom of God is going to be like in heaven, but here on earth? Are you willing to be different? than what the rest of the people are. To be the Christians that God calls us to be. To be the ones like Jesus. Did Jesus take risks? Did he eat with the sinners? Did he, hang around with all the outcasts? In his time, he was willing to take a risk. And why? So that the kingdom of heaven would begin to break through right here on earth. And I think Jesus is just asking us, are you ready to take the risk? Are you ready to step up in your risk comfort zone? Moving from maybe the conservative to the moderate level? Or are you ready to really be aggressive and to truly be involved? Well, that's it. You can answer the question.